I don't even know anymore. 3 things guaranteed in life: death, taxes, and Canada losing to Czechia in the World Junior Playoffs. Roll the intro. Gold medal, let's go! Welcome back to On the Fly. We're previewing these, predicting, recapping World Junior Championships, our Men's World Championship, the Women's World Championship, the U18 Men's World Championship. Expect the unexpected. Absolute abomination of the Canadian Junior National Team. I have a couple extra words I want to use in that one. And it's Freebird. Freebird, Freebird, Freebird. Of course, the Olympics are just around the corner. I'm going to coin it the rivalry day. World Junior history! Your home for international hockey. This is On the Fly. Hello and welcome back to On the Fly. Here we're recapping semi-final action from the World Junior Championships happening in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. So we'll hop into it today, starting with the scores from today's game, starting with a 4-3 victory, shootout victory at that, for Sweden over Finland. Now, this game, I thought, you look at the way that these two teams coming in, the big question mark was going to be around, could the Swedes knock off the Finns, especially around the offensive side. For the Finns, it was all about the defense today to see if they could shut down the Swedish offense. And credit to both teams today, because they both played their games quite effectively. And it became a classic game between one of the best rivalries in all of sports between Sweden and Finland. And I think you look at this game and the way that it played out, I don't think you could have written it any better. The Swedes start the game with a goal that, quite frankly, Rimpinen probably wants back. And then the battle begins, and you see kind of the back and forth game all game long from the Finns before they tie it on the Swedes, and then the Finns, and the Swedes, and the Finns. And it's that kind of game that you're expecting from these two teams. And for the Finns today, I thought they played arguably better than the Swedes did, but just didn't quite get that bounce. And for Sweden, they got out to the early lead and they tried to sit on it. But as we've talked about numerous times throughout these recap videos, the Swedes have kind of struggled to find their defensive footing at this tournament. And I don't necessarily think that it's all on them as far as their defense goes. I think it's more so they are such a good offensive team that they try and kind of jump on chances off the rush, and then they kind of get stuck up the ice. And so it will be interesting to see, especially as they do head to the gold medal game tomorrow against the Czechs, how well they're going to be able to transition on the defensive side. Because as we saw today with the Canadians, if the Swedes start to get stuck on the offensive side, if they start to push the puck up too quickly, all of a sudden the Czechs are going to come back down and likely score a goal on the goaltender. And so we'll see whether or not the Swedes are able to kind of find their defensive footing. The game against the Czechs will be similar to the game against the Finns, where it'll be a little bit more of a tight checking game, but it will be still a good game. And I think you look at the way the Swedes have played all tournament long, there's a reason why they are at where they are at this tournament. There's a reason why they swept through their group. There's a reason why they beat the Finns today, and albeit a shootout. But in many ways, it all comes down to how well the Swedes can play defensively, because the offense will take care of itself with this team. They'll get their chances and they will likely score. But at the end of the day, it's all going to come down to, at least for the Swedes, how well they can play defensively. And for the Finns today, I thought it was one of their better games, outside of a few fluky bounces, which really went both ways. The Finns had their bounces as well in this game. It all kind of came down to an inability to put the puck in the back of the net. And I think that's always been the problem for this Finnish team at this tournament coming in, was they have a lot of very good players and they play a very good system, but it was going to be how well they could translate that system into offense and production. We saw them struggle against the Czechs. The Canadians, they had a little bit of a better go at. But when you go up against a team like the Swedes, where you're going to have to beat them likely defensively, and you start the game with a weak goal, if you will, from basically the blue line, it kind of throws the confidence off a little bit. But then you follow it up with a great penalty kill and you get that momentum back. And then for the Finns, they played, I would say, far better than the Swedes did. And so unfortunately for them today, they couldn't pull out the win. It goes to a shootout. But you look at the way the overtime even played out, right? Where Viggo Bjork had, I think, 4 breakaways, and then he took a penalty. And then the Finns go on the power play with 2 minutes left, and it all comes down to how well the Swedes play defensively. And back to the point about them having to play defensively, it's very similar here. And I think you look at the way that the Finns played today, they can hold their heads proud. They nearly knocked off the Swedes, the big bad Swedes, and it all came down to one save in the shootout as well, or one goal in the shootout. And so a tight game to the very end, and one that I think the Finns, although they might not have got the result they wanted, is one they can definitely take some pride in the way that they played through and through, because they did earn every point or every goal they got today, and unfortunately they just couldn't find that one to capitalize it. So for the Swedes, a 4-3 victory in the shootout. They will move on to the gold medal game. The Finns will be sent to the bronze. And then comes the second game of today between Czechia and Canada. And I am going to bury my own allegiances aside for this one, for the full recap of this until we get to the Canada part. But what I will say for the Czechs today is they played outstanding. And this was the kind of effort that I wanted to see from them before they go and play the Swedes in the gold, because it's going to be a very similar game to the way that they played Canada. If they can continue playing the way that they did, they're going to win this tournament. And we'll see whether or not they're going to be able to shut down the Swedish offense and play like they did today. But the amount of mistakes that the Swedes make in their own end and turning the puck over through the neutral zone is exactly how the Czechs generate their offense. And we saw that today time after time after time, where you pick off a pass in the neutral zone, you go down and you end up scoring and more or less changing the momentum for the entire game. And so for the Czechs today, it was a near perfect game from them. And it always helps when you have good goaltending in net. It always helps when you're able to get on the scoreboard. But for this Czech team, they played very well today. And we'll see if they can carry that into their game against the Swedes tomorrow. And then for Canada, it's tradition at this point, right? It's not even, oh, look, the Czechs beat them again. It's just tradition. This is just another day in the yard for us Canadian fans, because time after time after time, it's just getting old. And it's the same mistakes that are made. It's turning the pucks over on the blue line. It's late goals, late momentum shifting goals. We saw two of them again today. We've seen the last 2 years where they've scored within the minute. This year they thought, oh, even better this year. We're going to give them the extra 15 seconds to go and try and score. It's just been disappointing as a Canadian fan these last 3 years. And it's only a matter of time, I think, before they finally figure out that something needs to change at the structural level. We'll see if that change ever ends up happening. But year after year after year of losing to the Czechs, at some point you have to realize that you can't just keep doing the same thing. And I feel like I'm sitting in the exact same spot I was last year up in Ottawa, where we were saying this exact thing, where it was the definition of insanity. And we need to get rid of the coach because the coach keeps making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And it's just, this year there was no excuses. Last year, you could blame it on the team selection. You could blame it on whatever else, the coach. You could blame it on anything. This year, they lost. And frankly, they got beat by a better team in the Czechs tonight, where the Canadians didn't play well, number one. And number two, they played against arguably the number 2 team at this tournament in the Czechs, who aren't going to give you a free game, especially after the shenanigans you pulled in the pre-tournament or the round-robin game, where you're smacking guys on the butt and you're not shaking hands after the game. Of course that's going to be bulletin board material. Of course they're going to use that against you. Of course they're going to be ready and roaring to go in this game. And you're surprised when they still kick your butt in this game. And it's just been it's another kind of disappointing tournament for the Canadians, where they fall short of winning gold, where yes, they're going to go play for a medal, and thank goodness they finally didn't lose in the quarters. Hallelujah. But it's still another tournament where this Canadian team is a failing team that doesn't achieve their goal. And it's getting old. It's the same old stories. It's the same old being too pretty in the neutral zone. It's the same old making turnovers. It's the same old, but at some point it has to change. And so obviously there'll be a lot that's going to be happening. There's going to be some changes with next year's team, and we'll see if they get more NHL players. But quite frankly, this was the best Canadian team they were going to send to this tournament. Yes, there's a few guys in the NHL, but that's, once again, those are just excuses because you knew that you weren't getting them. You knew you weren't getting Celebrini, who made the Olympic team. You knew well that you weren't getting Schaefer. And you can start to pick apart that and say, oh, if this guy was here, they would have won. But at the end of the day, this team was here for a reason. This team was here to win gold. They were the favorites coming into this tournament to win gold, and they didn't. And they fell far short of expectations. So a disappointing result for the Canadians today. A 6-4 loss to the Czechs. Another tournament of disappointment for them. But credit to the Czechs. They played really well today. They deserved the win, and they are a very good team. Do not sleep on them at this tournament. We said it in the first minute of our Czechia team preview that this team was gunning for gold this year, and they had a very good chance of doing it. I think later in that video, we also said that, at least in my opinion, the only team that was going to beat Canada at this tournament was going to be the Czechs, and so we'll see if they can go all the way, as obviously they already beat Canada. Now we'll see if they can make the rest of the way and beat the Swedes tomorrow, taking home their first gold medal in a very long time as well. So for the Czechs, a big deal. We'll see if they can make their way and win the gold. And for Sweden, they'll try and be the opposition for that. But that will do it for our scores. We'll now move on over to our news. So we'll start here with Sweden with lots of Löwe for Löwe Härenstam, who more or less saved the game today for the Swedes. And I don't use that term lightly, and it's one that I think you look at the way that the Swedes play, and they are a very offensive team, but one thing that comes with that is a lot of turnovers coming back the other way and shots on net, and so you need your goaltender to be your best player, and sure enough, he was today. And I think that's where you have to see it and say, hey, this team needs goaltending in a very bad way. If that can continue, the Swedes have a very good shot to beat the Czechs tomorrow. If they can get a hot goaltender in net, they have a very good chance to beat the Czechs tomorrow. But if they lose that piece, all of a sudden this entire Swedish team has the potential to crumble, and that's something I am looking for as we move into tomorrow's gold medal game, to see if the goaltending can stay strong for the Swedes. They'll do just fine, but if it starts to get a little weak, you start having some bad goals let in, all of a sudden that game can get very stretched out very quickly, and you can see the Czechs really capitalize on that. So for the Swedes today, lots of Löwe. And then to the Finns we go with every chance. And for the Finns, they had every chance to win this game. And unfortunately for them, they just couldn't quite find that one decisive goal to put themselves ahead of the Swedes. And we look at the way that they play. They play a very trap style defense where once they get up, it's very hard to come back against them. But part of the problem becomes that you have to get up to be able to hold that lead. And it's tough when you first let in the goal. We talked about it already. But then all of a sudden you get the goal. You swing the momentum back around. And you let another one. Then you just get the goal right back. And you kind of swing the momentum again. And I think for the Finns, they played a very good game today. Unfortunately, just came out on the wrong side of it. And so we'll see as they move ahead if they're able to capitalize on those chances. And one that I think you very much look at was that overtime power play. And if they score on that, they're into the gold medal game. And this entire game between the Swedes and the Finns and the shootout performance and how they nearly won, but lost on more or less the last shot of the game or the last shot of the shootout, it just kind of goes to show that every chance that you get, you have to bury, especially as a team like the Finns, where they have had a bunch of chances today. Unfortunately, they just couldn't find the back of the net in it. They do lose, and we'll head to the bronze medal game to go play against Canada for the bronze medal. We'll now move over to the Czechs they are a legit threat. And I've been saying it all tournament, so this isn't for our new Czech friends who I know you're probably watching this and laughing at the Canadian hardy har. I do think that you look at the way that the Czechs have played all tournament long, starting in the pre-tournament, which they struggled to find the offense. Then they opened the tournament with an explosive performance against the Canadians. Yes, they end up losing, but they played very well, and I was very impressed with their game. Then They go through the rest of the prelims. They play well enough to come that second spot, avoid having to be the third team in Group B, having to play the second team in Group A. And then all of a sudden you keep looking, and they're playing well, and they're winning games, and they win the quarters pretty handily. A 6-2 win over the Swiss, where they played their consistent game for the full 60 minutes, and that was the difference maker in that game. And then they roll into Canada, and them losing to Canada has not been a surprise, or them beating Canada has not been a surprise to me. You look at the way that these two teams match up, you knew it was going to be a good game. You include the added motivation of the antics at the end of that preliminary round game. And so I wouldn't say that this team has come out of the blue in any way. I think this is a legit threat at this tournament, and it would not surprise me to see them take the gold medal tomorrow. So definitely a team to be on the lookout for. And then to Canada with, does it really ever end? And this will be the fourth year, I believe, of covering this tournament with the day recaps and the rest of it. We did do a reaction video back in 2022, which was the McTavish save on the goal line, the Kent Johnson winner. So we had one video for that tournament. That was the weird summer one that they had. But then the 2023 World Juniors was the first one that we really covered on this channel. And it was great. They won. And you had the great performance by Connor Bedard. And that tournament was hands down one of the best tournaments I think we've seen. And at least as a Canadian fan, they played really well. You had the emergence of a bunch of different teams. The Slovaks had their run, nearly beat Canada in the quarters. You had the Czechs, who more or less came out of the blue and almost upset Canada at that tournament, especially with the powerhouse that they were at that year's tournament. And then you kind of go, right? And 2023 was a good year. 2024, they lose to Czechia in the quarterfinals. A very big upset at that point in time, where they weren't really expected to beat Canada at that year's tournament. So that's an upset. So that's 2024. So okay, right? They lose once. They followed up in 2025 in Ottawa. They lose to Latvia. They lose to the U.S. in the prelims. Then they go and play the Czechs, and they lose to the Czechs. That game was an expected loss. You come into today, and you knew they were going to be a hard opponent, right? The Czechs were the one team at this tournament who, as a Canadian fan, I didn't want to play until the very end. The gold medal game, okay, that kind of game you can get yourself up for. It's going to be a good game regardless. And at the very least, you get a silver medal. I knew coming into this one it was going to be a tough game for this Canadian team. And it was. And you could see the struggle. You could see them getting bogged down in the Czech system. But at some point, something needs to change, because we can keep running around. At some point, you have to realize that enough is enough. You have to make a change. And so for the Canadians, we'll see if they do. I don't know what else you change, really. The team's going to come in fresh next year. You might get some NHL talent back. You might not. And that's part of the fun of these tournaments, is you don't really know what you're going to get back at next year's tournament, because that's a full year away. That's a full draft cycle away. You don't know who's going to be where. And so you look at obviously there's one game left for Canada, so I don't want to take away too much of this video with that, but I can also appreciate that this is probably going to be the last day that we have Canadians watching this video. I know how the system works, but for our Czech fans, our Latvian fans, I know you guys are still kicking around, the Swedish fans, the Finnish fans, and everyone else who watches these videos, the Canadians are always the team for me that I look forward to watching, because they're my team. And every year of the last 3 years, you go into this tournament with high hopes, and this is the Canadian team that's going to do it. They're going to break the streak. And then it's the same result for the last 3 years. And so I just think that at some point you have to make a tactic change. You have to do something different, where you're not just running the same problem, or you're saying the same team, the same system over and over and over again, because it ends in results like this. So I'm going to end it here. I am going to say that it does end with this part of the segment, with the news. So we will now flip over to our updated playoff picture. So with the wins today, You will see the Czechs and the Swedes in the gold medal game, Canada and Finland in the bronze. As we flip it over now to tomorrow's schedule, we'll start here with Canada and Finland at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. This game I expect to be a pretty good game, and we've already seen these two play in the prelims. It was a Canadian game that I think they were okay with. The Finns really capitalized on a lot of their mistakes. The goaltending in that game wasn't great, I'd say. But you look at the way these two teams are built, they're going to want a medal at this tournament, especially the Finns, who year after year have shown themselves to be a team that are going to scrounge their way and they're going to find their way to a medal. Where Canada, I'd say this tournament especially, you look at the last 2 years without a medal, it's going to be a difficult year to walk home without anything at this tournament and be happy with it. You obviously already lost out on gold, so be it. But now it's about putting the pedal to the metal and actually bringing home a medal for the country after the last 2 years of quarterfinal exits. We'll see if they can do it. Should be a good game. Look for a defensive style from the Finns, offensive style from the Canadians. Not too much new that's going to be coming out, but if the Canadians continue to make mistakes, especially in the neutral zone, look for the Finns to counterattack and score some goals off the rush. That's where you're going to see some success, as well as the Finnish forecheck to try and cause some problems for the Canadians rather. That's where you can see some success for the Finns. So 4:30, the bronze medal game between Finland and Canada. Then the 8:30 p.m. Eastern game between Czechia and Sweden. This game is going to be a fireworks show. And what I mean by that is you have two teams who can both score a lot of goals if they'd like to. You have two teams that can both play very good defense at times when they want to, like we saw today for the Swedes and the Finns. But they're teams that know their style better than any other team. And so for the Swedes, I'm going to be looking to see if they can find offense early in this game. If they can find offense, look for them to be really successful in this game. But if they start to struggle offensively, look to see how they're playing defensively. If they're making mistakes and turning the puck over a lot, you're going to see the Czechs start to capitalize and get those opportunities, and they're going to bury it early. But if the Swedes can clean it up defensively and apply some more of that offensive pressure, you're going to see the Czechs start to dwindle themselves away, and they will likely end up losing that game. So for both these teams tomorrow, look for them to play their style of game. They're going to be playing their own type of system. The Czechs are going to be more off the rush. The Swedes are going to be more once they're set up in the offensive zone, passes them along the blue line. And so we'll see which team comes out on top, because these two teams are going to have some fireworks. As far as predictions go for me tomorrow, I think that Canada-Finland game is going to be a lot tighter than most people might think, especially after the way that first game went for them. I'm going to assume it might be a low-scoring game as well, but it's going to be a game that I think these two teams are going to be ready and roaring for, especially with everything that's on the line. And so I'm going to take Canada just because I have to, but the Finns would not surprise me at all to see them kind of chip away at this game and steal a win from the Canadians. And so for Canada, they have the better team than the Finns. It's just a matter if they can stretch that game out and play their offensive style versus the Finns' defense. So that's what I'm looking for in that one. Canada is going to be my prediction for that one. As for the Czechia and Sweden game, I said it in my preview video. The only team that can beat the Czechs, in my eyes, was Canada coming into this tournament. I'm going to stick to that, and I'm going to take the Czechs to beat the Swedes, winning the gold medal. The Czechs this year just look, in my eyes, so good, and we'll see if they can continue that against the Swedes. We'll see, but it's going to be an interesting game, definitely one to pay attention to. We'll see if that strong Czech defensive core can shut down the Swedish offense, but that will do it today for our scheduled content. We'll now move into live questions. We do put out a poll on our Twitter X platform asking for your questions and thoughts on the day. We'll start here with one from Peter, who says, Canada-Czechia, what a game. This should have been the final game, but unfortunately seeding was against. If Czechia plays like this tomorrow, gold should be theirs. And that's exactly right. And I think you look at the way that Canada messed up the standings, and I know it's always Canada's fault, but you look at the way that Canada, because they lost to Latvia, they got 11 points in the standings, or they beat Latvia in overtime, so they lost a point And so what that meant for the standings was that when you look at the grand scheme of it, if Canada gets that point against Latvia, if they score on that power play in regulation time, they'd be the top seed. They'd be the ones playing the Finns. The Swedes would be playing the Czechs. And what that would mean is that the Czechs and the Swedes would, that gold medal game that we're going to see tomorrow would have played today. And then the gold medal game likely would have been some form of Canada and, or Canada or Finland and Sweden and Czechia. And so what I would say for the Czechs is that they got one of the hardest games they're going to play at this year's tournament out of the way. And now it's about making sure you continue to throttle down and put your head in it and make sure you close out this tournament on a strong note. I think that as much as I think the Swedes are a very good team this year, I don't know if they're going to be able to get through that Czech defense, especially with the way that the Czechs play their structure. It's going to be very difficult for the Swedes to penetrate through. And it's the Finns this year and the Czechs, two teams that are relatively strong. But I think you look at the way that the Finns play, they're more on the defensive side, they counterattack. But for the Czechs, they have the ability to play offensively. And I think that's the biggest difference we're going to see at this year's tournament. And so as far as it's going to go with this game, I think the Czechs, if they can continue to play, as Peter had said, as long as they can continue to play their game, the Czechs will be just fine and they'll be able to likely come away with the victory. But if the Swedes are able to cause some problems, get on the forecheck, make the Czechs make mistakes in their own end, which they really haven't done that much of at this year's tournament, all of a sudden the Swedes are going to be successful because that's their bread and butter. If they can make the defense make mistakes, make them uncomfortable, they're going to be very successful. So that's what I'm looking for between the Czechs and the Swedes. It's going to be a good game. Like I said, my prediction is with the Czechs, but I do think it really could go either way at this year's tournament. Then we will go to Nick, the Iihf fan, who says, I can handle 3 straight eliminations. My World Juniors fandom began with 4 after all. I cannot handle 3 straight eliminations in games where we look like we do not belong on the same ice. This was more frustrating than last year. Last year, I sort of saw the loss coming based on how Canada played in the prelim round. But this time I felt as we hadn't shown up until it was far too late. And that's exactly right. And I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, but Canada coming into this tournament was by far the favorite. And it wasn't like, oh yeah, I mean, the Swedes have a good offense this year. They're going to be competitive with the Canada. It was, Canada is kind of on their own stool. And then you have the other teams that kind of fall underneath. And I'm not saying that in a braggy way, that's just kind of how it was. And I think you looked at the NHL draft picks and great. You look at the NHL talent coming in. They had the 3 this year. They had Misa, Peric, they had Brunick. Those guys you're looking to really start to generate chances. And Peric likely will end up winning that defenseman of the tournament. I personally think it should go to one of the 3 Czech guys, but that's neither here nor there. But you look at the way that all, like, coming into the tournament, you look to your key guys. Misa picked it up towards the end. Brunick kind of had a shaky tournament, but I wasn't expecting all that much out of him. But I think you look at the way that Canada played this tournament compared to the last one, where even in those games where they didn't play great, right? They didn't play well against Latvia. Yes, the Latvians played a very good game in that one too. I'm not taking away from Latvia. But they didn't play well. And that was one of the biggest differences from this year, where they didn't play well and they're still able to get the win, where last year, you don't play well, you get smoked. And unfortunately this year, they had their off games and they had their really good games. You know, they played some very good games against the Czechs, where they were able to make the Czechs stretched out and got through their defensive structure. You know, they played the same way against the Finns. They would open up the game. They played really well against them. And Denmark was just kind of a throwaway game as it was. And, you know, you look at the game against the Slovaks in the quarterfinals, that was a good game and they played well. And so you come into the game against the Czechs and unfortunately you just face almost a better team, an equally leveled team in the Czechs, where they got reinforcements from the prelim round. They got a better defenseman now, and they got another forward who's going to be a pain in your rear end. And so it becomes a tournament for me that you had those expectations coming in. It was reinforced throughout the prelims. It was reinforced in the quarterfinal game. And unfortunately, you didn't play a very good game against a better team. And that was the end result. And it was a disappointing loss today. And it's all going to come down to tomorrow to see if they can recover from that loss and go out and win a medal, because this will be the third year now where if they don't get a medal, they won't have a medal. And so we'll see whether or not they are able to right the ship. It's been a tough 3 years. We'll see if they can close it out tomorrow. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you'd like to drop a like, if you really like, you're subscribing. Tell all your friends and comment down below your thoughts on semifinal action at the World Junior Championship. Until next time, see you.